Now, some people will say that's much too kind. However, even that is high treason and conspiracy to commit murder. When we talk about the rest of this stuff, there's one thing I want us to keep in mind. If enough of the American people are stupid enough and manipulated enough to reelect this gang of thugs, then we, the true American patriots, will have no recourse but to continue pushing for a real investigation, perhaps by the Attorney General of New York City, who knows? An investigation telling the truth and leading to the indictment of these people. Their conviction, their removal from office, and their incarceration for a very long period of time.
We're going to return to our panel to discuss these issues, whether or not 9/11 was unavoidable. Still, we wonder, after such a supported and supposed failure, shouldn't anyone be held accountable? First of all, I want to introduce John Prados. He's a journalist and an author. His work appears regularly in one of the nation's great old journals on military affairs, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. Welcome, John.
Carl Schwartz is a principal in global access and a former high-level consultant to the Republican Party. Arkansas Republicans once asked him to run for governor against Bill Clinton. And more recently, he's been researching the background reasons for the removal of the Taliban. Carl Schwartz.
Welcome, Carl. Mr. Prados, who, if anyone in the government, should be held accountable for 9/11?
Who's to be held accountable? I think it's pretty clear. The President of the United States, George W. Bush, who failed to exert leadership at a key moment in the nation's history. The Vice President of the United States, Richard Cheney, who was in charge of a committee to deal with the terrorism issue and wouldn't meet with it before September 11th happened. Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, who cut money out of the terrorism budget the day before September 11th. The National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and her deputy, Stephen Hadley, who held back the plan to do anything about al-Qaeda for 9 months during the months that something could have been happened. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, which muffed its investigation of what was going on in terrorist circles in the United States. The Central Intelligence Agency, who failed to appreciate everything that was going on, even though George Tenet was running around with his hair on fire. There's a lot more I could talk about, but I think we've got little time here, so I'm going to pass it along.
There's somebody I want to hear from, and thank you, John. That was quite eloquent. You know, not only was the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act signed under President Nixon, but a lot of the recent environmental laws passed we couldn't have done without Sherry Boehlert and John Chafee, now deceased, and Lincoln Chafee, and wonderful Republicans who've stood up in the environment. We have a Republican here tonight who's here to prove this is and should be a nonpartisan issue. I'd like to hear from Carl Schwartz, please. Carl.
Every time I hear the name Ashcroft, I have to remind myself this was a guy that lost an election and a gubernatorial in the Show Me state to a dead guy. And then his next job is to come before every one of us and treat us all as an al-Qaeda suspect. So I am not real proud to call myself a Republican these days. I tell the simple story that I became a Republican in 1980 because of Bill and Hillary Clinton, and I became an independent recently because of George Bush. There have been several things said this evening. These are just factual, correcting things. We talked about this backstage. Because of the media and the timeline and how people put all this together, the doctor brought up Unocal a minute ago. Unocal is actually owned by the Venezuelan government-owned Petroleus. They are not a U.S.-owned company anymore. If you know anything about the pegging of the dollar to oil and the pegging of the dollar to the euro, there's only two companies on the face of this planet that have done that. One is Iraq. You can see what happened to them. And the other one was Venezuela. And you can pretty well come to a conclusion there's been quite a bit of interference in Venezuela as to what to do about their pegging to the dollar. We've tried to stomp Chavez to death politically down there. To address Sibel Evans, that came up in the clip a minute ago, I interviewed Sibel Evans for a book that I wrote, and everybody thinks it's got a cute name to it, and I didn't even name it. It's titled One-Way Ticket to Crawford, Texas. A conservative Republican speaks out. Where my story started in this actually started in 1999. I left Wall Street. I've been in this city many, many times. In fact, I've been in the World Trade Center many, many times. I used to office with Pre-Base Capital Markets at 100 Gold Street. Then we all moved with Smith Barney, and we went up here at 1345 Avenue of the Americas. And when Smith Barney moved down to Greenwich, 380 Greenwich, that's when I left the company and preferred to do something else with my life other than travel 500,000 to 1 million miles a year. But one of the things that I did was I went with UUNet. I saw telecom and AP-centrics as something that was interesting. Possibly profitable if you did it right. And I met a company in November of 1999 at a telecom conference. In the book, The Forbidden Truth, there's the Broussard book, Bin Laden, The Forbidden Truth. They disclosed that Brightest Corporation, excuse me, had actually signed a contract with Turkmenistan and with Pakistan to build the Trans-Afghanistan pipeline. Now, they were not able to ferret out the information I was, and I did this face-to-face. Excuse me, I am having problems with my voice. What we found is that the Brightest also had a contract with the Taliban and with General Rashid Dostum. The last remaining obstacle after our government and after our influence peddlers had put enough pressure on Turkmenistan to upend that government's agreements with Brightest. They also upended Pakistan. There's a good possibility when Bhutto was overturned, we may have been behind it. We have a lot of companies over there, including 4 that have electrical generation power plants in Pakistan right now, and they've had them since the mid-1990s. They wanted and need cheap natural gas to make those projects feasible. Now, some of you may have heard about the Enron-Dabol fiasco in Dabol, India. That is not a feasible project because of the cost of the natural gas is too high. They proceeded anyway. We lost $1 billion in U.S. Government guarantees. But the thing that stuck out to me the most is we found that this is a bipartisan problem. It's on both sides of the aisle, and that's why I finally decided to stand up and tell everything I knew. We actually know that there are we were actually putting RICO lawsuits together to go after certain parties, not about 9/11. Our research had nothing to do with 9/11. It had to do with international securities fraud. It had to do with telecom fraud. Because of an interview that I heard on the radio one time, that led me to Sibel Edmonds. I'm not under a gag order. I wanted to compare names. I wanted to compare trails, what we call rabbit trails. When you're investigating, these people will throw everything out in front of you they can to keep from getting caught. Sometimes you have to wade through 10, 15, or 20 shell corporations just to find out who the true owner of something is. And what we found was the same thing she found. And she confirmed it in a conversation with me just about the time they were putting the lid on her. She found drug trafficking, money laundering, she found foreign names, and she found American names in the financing of 9/11. Now, what she found had nothing to do with counterterrorism. I even quote in my book, sometimes it pays, Dick, did you check your 6? Did you check at 3, 9, and 12 to see if they were sitting right across the table or standing right next to you? What they found inside the FBI actually came from ongoing drug investigations dating back to 1998. And I heard the other day, just a minute ago, Mr. Thompson brought up Argentina. The company that had the contract with the Taliban is Brightest Corporation. They are from Argentina. On September 9, 2003, they won a lawsuit in our Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They had been tied up in the Texas courts since 1996. They won $500 million in a judgment for interference of contract in Turkmenistan. The only remaining thing was to take the Taliban and bright us out. And then we control it all. We control the Caspian Basin oil. We have the pipeline to get it to the sea. The oil and gas in the Caspian Basin, in current dollars, is worth somewhere between 11 and 12 trillion dollars. If you look at who was on the 9/11 Commission, on the Democrat side, who was directly benefiting